All right, here we go again. In this video, we are going to cover subpart K in its entirety, but that sounds like a lot, but it's really not very much. So let's get going here. It's called medical and first aid. And the reason why I'm going to cover this is because it's pretty important. Number one, goes to social regulation. Number two, it's very confusing sometimes. You're going to have questions about this. So it's subpart K. This is it. It's 1910.151, and there's 152, but it's reserved, so nothing in it. So medical services and first aid. And let's get this ball rolling. Oops, what happened there? All right, there we go. Back onto it. All right, 1910.151. It's 3 short paragraphs, but they're, well, let's go. The employer shall ensure the ready availability of medical personnel for advice and consultation on matters of plant health. Now, they're not talking about your hibiscus here. They're talking about a facility. Odd wording, but ready availability of medical personnel for advice and consultation. Remember, even though physical hazards control, we're concentrating mostly on physical issues, but there's also health issues that are part of the workplace too. So got to have some medical personnel for advice. Usually you have a industrial clinic that handles workers' comp, and they usually are pretty good about this type of thing and giving you help. In the absence of an infirmary, clinic, or hospital in near proximity to the workplace, which is used for the treatment of all injured employees, a person or persons shall be adequately trained to render first aid. Adequate first aid supplies shall be readily available. Okay, this is kind of the meat and potatoes of this thing. Even if you have an infirmary, clinic, or hospital near proximity, it doesn't define near proximity. And at the treatment of all injured employees, that's kind of a vast thing too. Somebody gets a little, they're going to go to the hospital for a Band-Aid. A person or persons shall be adequately trained to render first aid. So you're usually going to have somebody there to render first aid for just minor stuff too, you know. So that's why this is a little ambiguous. But here's the kicker, though. Adequate first aid supplies shall be readily available. We'll talk about that a good bit, because that's the thing here that is up for grabs, so to speak. But if you don't have a hospital nearby, person or persons shall be adequately trained to render first aid. Now, again, this says first aid. So if you want to go about the issue of first aid under 1907, there's a specific things that are first aid. So they're very minor injuries. Where the eyes or body of any person may be exposed to injurious corrosive materials, suitable facilities for quick drenching or flushing of the eyes and body shall be provided within the work area for immediate emergency use. Now, these are emergency showers and emergency eye wash stations. And if you have any kind of chemicals that can get in the eyes, it says corrosive, but anything that can damage the eyes, and read your safety data sheet, you need to have eye wash stations. And the best kind of the kind that are plumbed in, piped in, excuse me, and the portable ones are okay, but you really got to keep after them. So that is the entirety of 1910.151. And so we're going to look at Appendix A, because it is going to give us some more insight into this. It's non-mandatory, and it's called first aid kits. So first aid supplies are required to be readily available under paragraph 1910.151b. An example of the minimal contents of a generic first aid kit is described in ANSI Z308-1, minimum requirements for workplace first aid kits. The contents of the kit listed in the ANSI standard should be adequate for small work sites. When larger operations or multiple operations are being conducted at the same location, employers should determine the need for additional first aid kits at the work site, additional types of first aid equipment and supplies, and additional quantities and types of supplies and equipment in the first aid kits. Now, at OK Foods, we had nurses stations at the main facilities, so that would kind of cover that, because we had all kind of first aid stuff there. And let's continue on this appendix. In a similar fashion, employers who have unique or changing first aid needs in their workplace may need to enhance their first aid kits. The employer can use the OSHA 300 log, OSHA 311 log, or other reports to identify these unique problems. Consultation from the local fire rescue department, appropriate medical professional, or local emergency room may be helpful to employers in these circumstances. By assessing the specific needs of their workplace, employers can ensure that reasonably anticipated supplies are available. Employers should assess the specific needs of their work site periodically and augment the first aid kit appropriately. If it is reasonably anticipated that employees will be exposed to blood or other potentially infectious materials while using first aid supplies, employers are required to provide appropriate personal protective equipment in compliance with the provisions of the Occupational Exposure to Bloodborne Pathogens Standard, 1910.1030. This standard lists appropriate PPE for this type of exposure, such as gloves, gowns, face shields, masks, and eye protection. Now, not going to delve into something called letters of interpretation. That's when somebody writes to OSHA and a couple of years later, OSHA answers them back. Or I shouldn't say that. It's when the spirit moves them. So this one was a couple of them. We're going to pick out a few of them here. How does the ANSI standard Z308 relate to 29 CFR 1910.151? In an industrial workplace, for example, a corporate office, where employees perform administrative duties and there are no specific employment-related injuries anticipated, would a kit matching the ANSI standard be sufficient for compliance with 29 CFR 1910.151B? The reply from OSHA says paragraph B requires that in the absence of an infirmary, clinic, or hospital near the workplace, a person or persons must be adequately trained to render first aid. Adequate first aid supplies must be readily available. So ANSI standards became mandatory. OSHA standards become mandatory OSHA standards only when and if they are adopted by OSHA. ANSI Z308, minimum requirements for workplace first aid kits, was not adopted by OSHA. However, ANSI Z308-1 provides detailed information regarding the requirements for first aid kits. OSHA has often referred employers to ANSI Z308 as a source of guidance for the minimum requirement for first aid kits. They're not going to adopt it, but they're going to kind of use it. Makes no sense whatsoever. They adopt all kind of other things, but why they don't want to adopt this is beyond me. I think it's because they don't know what to put in the first aid kit either. All right. What's the problem with first aid kits? Well, if you have first aid kits out of the plant, you open up later and everything's gone. Nobody had an accident, but everything's gone. It walks out. That's a real big problem with first aid kits. So your first aid kit should be somewhere that's kind of somebody has an eye on them, maybe in the hallway outside the supervisor's office or something like that. Because if you don't, they'll disappear. Then when you need them, they won't be there. So, but here you go. OSHA's telling you. Remember, they mentioned this in the body of the regulation. They didn't tell you though it wasn't required. So it's kind of deviousness on the part of OSHA, in my opinion. They should be more straightforward. So the contents of the first aid kit listed at ANSI Z308 should be adequate for a small work site, like the one you described in your letter. However, larger. Oh, I think I went backwards. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, we covered that already. Shall period. Okay. Are there any specific interpretation for the term readily available? The term readily available is not defined in the standard. There you go. However, responding in a timely manner can mean the difference between life and death. Therefore, the person who has been trained to render first aid must be able to quickly access the first aid supplies in order to effectively provide injured or ill employees with first aid attention. The first aid supplies should be located in an easily accessible area, and the first aid provider generally should not have to travel through several doorways, hallways, and/or stairways to access first aid supplies. Granted, that's true. This is a big problem because, like I said, if you put a first aid kit in the middle of a plant, it'll be gone. And when you want it, then it won't be there. I mean, the frame of the kit will be there, the doors and all that stuff, but there won't be anything worthy inside of it, especially like aspirins and stuff like that. So an easily accessible area, that's a tough one. So depends on your facility. And one of the reasons why they kind of leave it up to you because their facility is so different. So now, is there a standard for placing first aid kits and/or cabinets based on employee numbers, density, or geography? And the reply from OSHA is 151B does not specifically address the placement of first aid kits and or cabinets based on employee numbers, density, or geography. Therefore, it's the employer's responsibility to assess the particular needs of the workplace and tailor first aid kits and their placement to the specific needs of the workplace. So again, another question was, what measuring stick would an OSHA compliance officer use to determine acceptable first aid supplies for compliance with 29 CFR 1910.151B? OSHA compliance offers take into consideration a variety of factors when assessing compliance. The factors that you mentioned above are some of the things that a compliance officer evaluates when assessing a first aid kit. We cannot provide a list of exact requirements which will apply for every workplace. Each workplace must be evaluated on a case-by-case basis, taking into account the types of injuries and illness that are likely to occur at that workplace. So here's the ANSI 0308.1 minimum requirements for workplace first aid kits. Now, again, it's not an OSHA requirement, but a good guideline, although they want you to think it is. So 16 adhesive bandages, 1 inch by 3 inches, 1 adhesive tape, 10 antibiotic treatment applications, 10 antiseptic applications, breathing barrier, burn dressing, gel soak, burn treatments, cold pack, eye covering, eye wash, first aid guide, hand sanitizer, 2 pair of exam gloves, roller band and scissors, sterile pad, trauma pad, triangle bandage. And that's pretty big, 40 by 40 by 56. Pretty general stuff there. So that's, if you have a small facility, that's probably going to be fine. So we can see, what does a safety professional do about first aid kits? OSHA doesn't really give you much to go on here. So here's what I suggest. Gather up all the data and talk to a medical professional. After, ask if they can give you a written recommendation. This could be your, and they usually will, this could be your clinic where you go for all your workers' comp claims. And these medical professionals should be coming to your plant once in a while, walking around, seeing what kind of job you have. They certainly know what kind of injuries you have. So they should be the ones that say, well, you know, most of your injuries are minor lacerations, so you need to be heavier and that type of thing. And that, you know, that type of thing. You know, you never had a burn in 10 years, so maybe you don't have to worry too much about the burn thing. You might have one in there, but so they should have a pretty good idea. And you should, again, like the appendix says, look at your OSHA logs for this type of thing. So gather up your data and go talk to the medical professional. What data? Again, OSHA 300 logs to show types of injuries, maybe job descriptions, maybe some most dangerous equipment, anything that would give the medical professional insight on what is needed for the first aid kit, including a tour of your facility. So this is something that's going to take a little work, but I think if you do due diligence here, look at this, get them to recommend something, and keep that stuff available, you'll be okay. So first aid kits are always something that's confusing because OSHA kind of waffles on it quite a bit. So good luck with the first aid kits. But again, just do due diligence, talk to the medical professional, look at your OSHA logs, figure out, you know, what kind of injuries you're probably going to have there, staff accordingly, have it available someplace that can be looked at. And if it's someplace that maybe things are missing all the time, maybe have it inspected all the time. So it's a tough thing. You're gonna have people come in your plant and refill some people do this, refill all your first aid kits. And they do that and they charge a good bit of money for it too. But you know, they're going to be filled every week or so. Doesn't mean they're not going to be empty in the next day, but they're going to be filled. You can do that if you want to, that's fine. But still, you got to make sure that they're there. So first aid kits are an issue. I don't think I ever remember ever being written up for them or ever having them look at them, but something you need to look at. They're good to have. You gotta have them, and you should have somebody trained in first aid and first aid CPR and all that stuff. Should be people in your plant trained. So, all right, that's it. Good luck with your first aid kits.